I know about Ryan, she whispered into the phone, her voice soft, almost amused, like she was sharing a harmless joke instead of detonating my entire life. And I stood there in the hallway, keys still in my hand, listening to my wife talk about her affair like I didn't exist, like I was just background noise in a house I paid for, and the strangest part wasn't the betrayal, it was how calm I felt. Like something inside me had already accepted this moment long before it arrived. My name is Ethan Cole, 38 years old, project manager, the kind of guy who works 60-hour weeks, pays the mortgage on time, keeps the lawn trimmed to HOA standards, the kind of man people assume is predictable, maybe even a little boring. And maybe that's why Olivia thought I was clueless, because I never raised my voice, never questioned her late nights, never pushed when her stories didn't quite line up. But what she didn't understand was that silence isn't ignorance, sometimes it's observation, and I had been observing for months. The first crack wasn't dramatic, no lipstick on a collar, no obvious lie, just a shift in her rhythm, the way she started guarding her phone like it held state secrets, the way her laughter changed, lighter, sharper, like it belonged to someone else. I remember one Tuesday night, she said she had a late meeting downtown, but her location pinged 10 miles in the opposite direction. A detail so small most people would ignore it, but I didn't. I saved it, not because I wanted to catch her, but because something in my gut told me I already had, and once you notice one inconsistency, you start noticing everything, the extra effort in her appearance on random Thursdays, the sudden interest in girls' nights. That never seemed to include photos, the way she'd come home smelling like a different life, not wrong, just not ours, and I didn't confront her. I didn't ask questions, I didn't give her the chance to rewrite the narrative. Instead, I did something far more dangerous. I stayed quiet. I installed a small camera in the living room, nothing invasive, just enough to see who walked through the door when I wasn't supposed to be home. I synced our shared calendar with a tracker she didn't know about. I archived every message she thought she deleted, not out of anger, not yet, but out of clarity. Because if there's one thing I've learned in 38 years, it's that truth doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be undeniable. And piece by piece, her dirty secret stopped being a suspicion and started becoming a record, a timeline. A story she was writing without realizing I was already reading the final chapter. And the night I stood in that hallway listening to her laugh with him, I knew something she didn't. This wasn't the moment I found out about her affair. This was the moment I decided exactly how it would end. I did not sleep that night, not because I was angry, but because my mind was too clear, like every scattered thought had suddenly lined up into something sharp and precise. I sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, a cold cup of coffee in my hand, replaying everything I had already collected, every timestamp, every recorded entry, every message she thought was gone, and for the first time, I was not asking myself if she was cheating, I was asking myself how far she was willing to go, because betrayal does not start at its worst point, it grows, it evolves, it tests boundaries, and what I was seeing was no longer just an affair, it was a pattern, a calculated shift in loyalty. Olivia was not just lying to me. She was building a version of her life that did not include me. The next morning, she walked into the kitchen like nothing had changed, sunlight hitting her face, coffee in her hand, that same composed expression she wore so well. She asked me if I would be home late again, and I nodded, calm, steady, exactly who she thought I was, but inside, something had already detached. I started noticing the smaller details more clearly now, the way she angled her phone away when texting, the slight pause before answering simple questions, the rehearsed tone in her voice when she mentioned work. It was not chaos, it was controlled, and that made it more dangerous. Later that afternoon, I checked the footage from the camera, and there it was, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just real, Ryan walking through my front door like he belonged there, like the space I built had already been reassigned. They sat on the couch, talking, laughing, comfortable in a way that told me this was not new, this was routine, and I did not react. I did not slam a door or make a call. I simply saved the file, backed it up twice, and labeled it with the date, because at that point, I was no longer reacting to her actions, I was documenting her choices. And with every new piece of evidence, the picture became clearer. This was not a mistake, This was a decision, and decisions have consequences. The only question left was when I would let her face them. I stopped thinking of it as catching her and started thinking of it as understanding the full scope of what she was doing, because once you remove emotion from the equation, patterns become obvious, and Olivia had a pattern. Ryan was not just visiting when I was gone. He was there on specific days, usually when my schedule showed late meetings or out of town calls, which meant she was not just reacting to opportunity, she was planning around me, and that detail mattered more than anything else, because it turned this from a moment of weakness into a deliberate structure. I pulled bank statements next, not because I suspected anything financial at first, but because patterns leave traces everywhere, small charges at places she never used to go, dinners for two that were never mentioned, ride-shares logged at times that did not match her stories, nothing outrageous on its own, but together they told a story she could never admit out loud, and the more I looked, the clearer it became that her life had split into two versions, the one she performed for me and the one she lived when she thought I was not looking, and what unsettled me was not just the betrayal, it was how comfortable she had become in it. Like she had already rewritten the rules of our marriage without telling me. A week later I came home earlier than expected. Not rushing, not trying to catch anything in the moment, just following the timeline I had already mapped out. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels staged. I walked through the front door, set my keys down like any normal day, and called her name. No answer, but I did not need one, because I already knew. Instead of going upstairs, I walked into my office, closed the door, and opened the live feed from the camera I had installed, and there they were again, in my living room, relaxed, unguarded, like they had done this enough times to believe it was safe, and that was the moment something shifted permanently inside me. Not anger, not even sadness, just clarity. I realized I was not dealing with a mistake that could be explained or fixed. I was dealing with a choice she had made over and over again, and choices define people more than words ever do. I watched for a few more seconds, then turned the screen off, not because I could not handle it, but because I had seen enough. I did not need more evidence to convince myself. I needed it to make sure she could never deny it, and that required patience, precision, and timing, because the truth, when revealed too early, becomes an argument, but when revealed at the right moment, it becomes final. So I stepped out of my office, grabbed my jacket, and left the house without making a sound, because the next time I walked back in, it was not going to be as the man she thought she understood. It was going to be as the one who decided exactly how her story would end. I gave it 3 days before I made my next move, not because I needed more proof, but because timing matters more than emotion, and I wanted everything aligned before I stepped forward. During those days I watched without reacting, every entry, every exit, every message that confirmed what I already knew, but what I focused on most was Olivia herself, the way she carried this double life with such ease, like she had convinced herself it was justified, like I was the one who had somehow fallen behind in a story she had already rewritten, and that told me something important. She was not expecting consequences, she was expecting continuation. That illusion was exactly what I needed, so I leaned into it. I acted exactly like the version of me she believed in, calm, predictable, distracted by work. I even mentioned a possible overnight trip the following Friday, casually, like it was nothing, and I watched her reaction closely. It was subtle, just a flicker of anticipation behind her eyes, but it was there, and that was enough, because it confirmed she was already planning around my absence again. That same night, I finalized everything on my end. I organized the footage, labeled every file clearly, dates, times, angles. I printed key records, secured backups in multiple places, and reached out to a lawyer recommended by a colleague. Not for confrontation, but for structure, because if this was going to unfold, it needed to unfold cleanly, no noise, no chaos, just facts presented at the exact right moment. By Thursday evening, everything was ready, and all that was left was to let her walk into the situation she thought she controlled. Friday morning I packed a small bag, kissed her on the cheek, and told her I would be gone until Saturday. She smiled, warm, effortless, like nothing in the world was out of place, and as I walked out the front door, I realized something with absolute certainty. This was no longer about discovering the truth, it was about deciding when she would finally have to face it. I did not go far that Friday, just far enough to make it believable. I checked into a small business hotel about 12 miles away, the kind of place with neutral walls and a quiet lobby where nobody asked questions. I set my bag down, turned on the television for background noise, and opened my laptop. The live feed came up instantly, clear, steady, exactly how I left it. The house looked normal at first, empty, still, untouched, and for a moment it almost felt like I was overthinking everything, like maybe this was all just a story I had built in my own head. But then the front door opened at 2:17 in the afternoon. Olivia stepped in first, moving quickly, checking her phone. Her posture relaxed in a way she never was when I was home, and seconds later Ryan followed. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just familiarity, like he had walked that path enough times to stop thinking about it. They did not look around, did not question anything, because in their version of reality, there was nothing to question. I watched them settle into the living room, casual, comfortable, like they were borrowing a life that was not theirs, and what struck me was not what they were doing, but how normal it all seemed to them, how easy it had become, like the line they crossed months ago had completely disappeared. I let the footage run, not reacting, not interrupting, just letting the timeline build itself exactly the way I needed it to. Every minute added weight, every second reinforced the truth, and as I sat there, in that quiet hotel room, I realized something that settled everything in my mind. This was the last time they would ever feel this comfortable in my house, because by the time the day was over, the illusion they had been living in was going to collapse in a way either of them saw coming. By 4:03 in the afternoon, I had everything I needed, not just suspicion, not just confirmation, but a complete record that told the story better than any words ever could. I paused the footage and leaned back in the chair, the quiet hum of the hotel air conditioner filling the room, and for a moment I just sat there, not thinking about Olivia, not thinking about Ryan, but thinking about how easily people rewrite reality when they believe no one is watching, because what they were doing was not hidden anymore, it was documented, preserved in exact detail, and that changed everything. I opened the folder I had prepared and began organizing the final sequence, selecting the clips that showed the timeline clearly, the entry, the familiarity, the consistency, nothing exaggerated, nothing emotional, just undeniable truth presented in a way that could not be twisted or explained away. I uploaded copies to a secure drive, emailed a set to my lawyer, and saved another to a flash drive that I placed in my jacket pocket, not because I was unsure, but because control comes from preparation. And I was done leaving anything to chance. Then I checked my phone. One missed call from Olivia, followed by a message that read, "Meeting ran long, I might be late tonight." And I stared at it for a second longer than necessary, not because it hurt, but because it confirmed exactly who she had become. The words were smooth, casual, practiced, the kind of lie that only works when the other person still believes in you, and that version of me no longer existed. I typed back a simple response. "No problem, take your time," and set the phone down, because the plan did not require confrontation, it required precision, and by early evening, I knew exactly how it was going to unfold, not in anger, not in chaos, but in a moment so controlled that there would be no room left for denial, because when the truth is revealed the right way, it does not ask for a reaction, it forces one, and as the sun started to set outside that hotel window, I realized this was the last quiet moment before everything changed. By the time the sky turned dark, I was already on my way back, not rushing, not hesitating, just following the plan exactly as I had laid it out. The drive felt shorter than usual, like my mind had stopped measuring distance, and started focusing only on what came next. When I pulled into the neighborhood, everything looked the same, quiet streets, porch lights glowing, the kind of calm that makes you believe nothing is wrong, and that contrast almost made it easier. I parked a few houses down, not hiding, just choosing my moment. I checked my phone, another message from Olivia. "Still out, do not wait up." And I read it without reacting, because that sentence was no longer a lie to me, it was evidence. I stepped out of the car, walked toward the house, and for a second I paused at the front door, not because I was unsure, but because I understood exactly what that door represented. Everything before it was assumption, everything after it would be truth. I unlocked it quietly and stepped inside. The house was dim, the same familiar layout, the same furniture, but it felt different now, like I was standing in a place that no longer belonged to me. I did not call her name. I did not make noise. I walked straight to the living room and set my jacket down, then I reached into my pocket and felt the flash drive, still there, still ready, and that grounded me, because this was never about catching them in the act. It was about ending the story in a way that could not be rewritten. I moved toward my office, turned on the monitor, and connected the drive. The screen lit up with the files I had prepared, clean, organized, undeniable. I adjusted the angle of the display so it would be visible from the living room. Then I sat down and waited, not for them to arrive, but for the moment when everything they believed would start to fall apart. Because the difference between chaos and control is preparation, and I had already decided how this night was going to unfold. The sound of the front door came just after 9:12, soft, casual, like any other night, followed by her voice, light, relaxed, the same tone she used when she believed everything was still under control. I stayed seated, hands folded, eyes on the screen in front of me, and listened as she moved through the house, setting her bag down, calling my name once without much effort, not expecting an answer. Then her footsteps slowed as she stepped into the living room. I could hear the pause, the shift in her breathing, the moment she realized something was different. "Ethan?" she called again, this time sharper, and I finally stood, not rushing, not reacting, just present. I walked into the room and met her eyes, and for a second, everything was still, no anger, no shouting, just silence heavy enough to carry what was about to happen. She started to speak, something about her meeting, something rehearsed, but I did not respond. I simply turned the monitor slightly toward her and pressed play. The footage began without introduction, clear, unmistakable, the front door opening earlier that day, her stepping inside, Ryan following behind, no confusion, no context needed, just reality exactly as it happened. I watched her face instead of the screen, the way the color drained, the way her expression shifted from confusion to recognition, and then to something she could not control. "This is not what it looks like," she said, but the words came too late, too weak against what was right in front of her. Because this was never about what it looked like, it was about what it was, and for the first time since I had started watching, she was the one with nowhere to go, no version of the story she could rewrite, no angle she could twist, just the truth playing out in real time, and I let it run for a few more seconds before pausing it, the room falling into silence again, heavier now, final, and when I looked at her, I did not feel anger. I felt something far more certain. I felt finished. I did not raise my voice, I did not step closer, I just looked at her and let the silence do what words could not. Because at that point, there was nothing left to explain, nothing left to argue. She tried again, softer this time, saying my name like it still meant something, like it could pull me back into a version of us that no longer existed. But I did not move. I reached into my jacket and placed the envelope on the table between us, clean, simple, final. She glanced down at it, hesitation flashing across her face before she opened it, and as her eyes moved across the first page, I watched the realization settle in, not just about the footage, but about everything that came with it, the separation terms, the financial structure, the timeline already documented and filed. This was not a reaction, this was a conclusion. "You were going to leave anyway," I said, calm, steady, not accusing, just stating what was already obvious. She shook her head, trying to deny it, but even she could hear how empty that sounded now, because the truth had already removed every place she could hide. I picked up the flash drive and set it beside the envelope. "Everything is backed up," I added, not as a threat, but as a fact, and that was the moment she understood. This was not something she could fix with an apology or a different version of the story. This was over, completely, finally. I walked past her without waiting for a response, not because I was trying to escape, but because there was nothing left to stay for. At the door I paused for just a second, not to look back, but to take in the weight of what I was leaving behind, and then I stepped outside into the night air, quiet, steady, and for the first time in months, everything felt clear, because betrayal may start in secret, But karma never does, and when it arrives, it does not need noise, it only needs truth.